everyone. Thank you for tuning into my channel. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Brian Simmons, somebody who I have appeared on his channel numerous times, debating, talking about the topic that's pretty much at hand, the time text, audience relevance, the time statements, and, the discrepancies between partial, full preterism, and of course, futurism. So thank you, Brian, for coming on my channel. And I would just, it's always a delight to talk to you. And yeah, I would just like for you to have your liberty and, share what's been on your heart, what's on your mind.
Well, thanks, Tristan. It's always a pleasure to discuss theology, philosophy, and other topics with you. We've had some discussions before, and I've really enjoyed them. And I think you've contributed quite a bit to the overall discussion within the theology community. I just want to say, just at the outset, and then I'll hand it back to you. I'm not attacking anybody. I don't want to attack anybody's system or anything like that. What started this journey for me was, this is over 20 years ago now, is really when I took a break from theological study. And I just went off and I was involved in the music, sort of like the underground music scene in Dallas for a few years. And I just took a break from theology. I said, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't want to discuss it. And I just decided that I was going to just put it on the table. Well, then I started reinvestigating it a few years later, and I came to the conclusion. I said, these guys have something right. There's something that they're bringing to the table that we need to look at and that we're not taking seriously enough. We know that Sproul, R.C. Sproul, he took the time frame indicator seriously. We know that others within the post-millennial camp took them seriously. And I thought that perhaps I was being a little bit rash in my rejection of the grammatical historical interpretation of these texts, especially just to give one example, Matthew chapter 24:34, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. But what was he talking about? Was he talking about something that would take place thousands of years in the future, or was he talking about something that would take place within the lifetime of that contemporary audience? So once I started looking at it from that standpoint, I said, these guys have something that they're bringing to the table. But I thought that in the case, say, of full preterism, I thought they were taking it too far. And so I said, well, let me see what the opposite side is saying. And so I started comparing the systems through a process of I guess you would call it a calibration, which is basically just simply taking data and putting it on one end of the scale to outbalance it, to bring into balance the other side, which is perhaps a little bit too maximalistic. So I started doing this more and more, and then the more I thought about it, the more I realized, there's a lot of emotionalism that goes into these studies. And I think what people are doing, especially on the futurist side, and especially on the ex-preterist side, is people are taking taking a hardline approach against, say, the grammatical historical reading, simply because of emotional reasons that they've encountered in their spiritual journeys. I call them spiritual journeys, but I really perhaps ought to call them psychological journeys, because I'm not sure how much spirituality enters into these things. I do know that there's quite a few folks that I've encountered who seem to have suffered some sort of childhood religious trauma. I'm not sure, but it seems as though what they've done in embracing full preterism is they were simply overreacting to something that happened in their childhood. On the other hand, they swung back in an opposite direction once they left that system. So they're sort of oscillating between extremes of this theological spectrum. And I said, there's got to be sanity. There's got to be a middle zone. And so what I did eventually was I turned 50 last year. And I said, 50, that's a great year to make it a Jubilee year, to go through everything, all of these ideological constructs that I've been taught, education-wise, faith-wise, etc., and to go through it just a clean house, get rid of the things that don't belong, and to keep the things that are healthy and sane and that can give me some impetus in the long run. Well, I did that, and the more I realized that a lot of what I was being taught from my 30s onward in the fundamentalist perspective of things was very, very one-sided. It didn't make allowance for things like science, education, the arts, culture, stuff like that. That what they were basically doing was hiding out from things like science, education. They were denying things like the age of the earth. The earth we know is many, probably billions, millions at least years old. And here we have folks that are still holding this antiquated view that the earth is 6,000 years old. They were
Right.
seeking hideouts and refuges from science, education, the arts, civilization. And they're really just pockets of humanity which are not contributing to civilization. They're not contributing to any kind of mental or even psychological health in any regard. They're simply creating backwaters. So I said, I don't really think it's fair to discard my entire past and to say, well, I was only, I was a miserable person all the way up until the time I was 30. And then I had to just completely discard my past and start with a fresh slate. I says, I don't really think that's correct. I think we can't, I don't think we should discard our futures. I think our pasts rather, I think our pasts enter into who we are. We can't get rid of them, but what we can do is use them as building stones for something better. So anyways, I'm gonna hand it back to you, but I took time to overhaul some of my theological beliefs. And I came to a conclusion that preterists have some things right, the futurists have some things right, but the preterists are completely right about the time texts. And there's nothing that anybody can really say that's going to debunk that, because even if you take it text by text basis, I mean, you could explain the text in a modified or accommodated sense, but I've got 20 other texts waiting to throw at you. This is the strength of the preterist position, is it's got so much information, it's got so much data that's just waiting to be unleashed. And this is why futurists do poorly in debates with preterists, because if Christ wasn't talking to his immediate audience, well, who was he talking to? The modern church, I mean, unless you're a dispensationalist, you're not going to believe that with Jesus coming right around the corner, he's coming to we need to take these verses literally. He's coming soon. He's at hand, etc. The millennials aren't teaching that. The Presbyterians aren't teaching that. The Lutherans aren't teaching that. So to whom were these warnings to watch and wait to be
Right.
directed? Was it to that immediate audience, or was it to an audience far in the future that may never apply to them simply because the church doesn't want to take them seriously? So I came to the conclusion that it was the original generation that Christ spoke to. That Bertrand Russell, in a sense, I think he was right in one sense, that if these are to be taken in a physical, literal way, then I really believe that you would have to call them failed prophecies. And we'll get to that, I guess, in a moment. I want to hand it back to you. What do you think?
No, I think you made great points. Especially with the futurists, their attempts to kind of belittle those time texts and the principle of audience relevance. And that's one thing I've always respected about your perspective of theology, was that you honored those time texts. Um, I once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? You have expectancy and you have intentionality. The expectancy that yes, they did expect for Christ to return in their lifetime. And the apostles intended for these prophetic states of affairs to manifest in their reality. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. And yes, like R.C. Sproul and several other scholars, they do see those time texts. Well, let me ask you, I mean, you did go through a journey where universalism was the conclusion of full preterism. Do you still believe that full preterism leads to universalism like Max King? Does it lead to IO, or is now I see a lot of different versions of full preterism now? I mean, what's the future for it? I mean, what's your take as of right now on the full preterist doctrine? And if I could ask, what are some of your key arguments against full preterism that you believe debunks it?
Those are some good questions. Well, to start with the IO and the universalism, I don't believe that full preterism must necessarily lead to IO, but I think it does offer it a major boost. I think it can certainly lead to IO. It depends. Now, I think Revelation 21, I think that's an exceptional instance. I think that's going to be always on the full preterist side. But then again, you could also have ways of explaining that, of alternative interpretations of that to fit in with IO. As far as universalism goes, I actually am still a universalist, but I'm not I'm what you would call a restorationist. So I do believe there will be a restoration eventually. But
Okay.
I think that it's possible to hold. It's very easy to hold a universalist position from a full preterist perspective, only because you've got this idea of death being destroyed, the kingdom being delivered back to the Father, and all that
Yeah.
at the destruction of Jerusalem. So it really does make one put things like sin and death and all of the paraphernalia of the old covenant. It does kind of put those things in the past. And so you might well ask, well, what are we being saved from today? Is there any need for this salvation? He was speaking to saints who are living under an old Testament system, and these things were all part of that old creation. And this is the path that some people have gone down. That people I respect too, who believe that there is a universalist aspect to salvation now that there wasn't, say, in the first century. I would say that I would lean against that only because I think that now we're getting into issues where the law is now being dismissed, where now there's no object of morality. In other words, it's not like, well, if you screw up or if you disobey the law, if you murder somebody or rape somebody, nothing's going to happen to you because the law only applied to the old covenant.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is something that I don't think any of the pioneers who developed full preterism ever envisioned. But Max King did go down that road, and I think he took a more of a postmodernist approach to the issue. I think he kind of just waddled his way out of Christianity through the back door. But he I think from the covenant eschatology perspective, I think there are some legitimate inferences that could lead to universalism. Where I would go insofar as offering arguments, why I think full preterism is wrong, is I would probably just simply stick to the timing of the millennium. And it sounds like a cop out. It might sound like a weak argument, but it's clear to me just from reading Revelation, and there's all different theories on what John was doing or what the author of Revelation was doing. We know that he was imitating Daniel, but we don't know what exactly. We don't know whether he was giving the true interpretation of Daniel. We don't know whether he was sort of giving a follow-up, a commentary on Daniel. But I think at the very least we can agree that he was very under the influence of Danielic prophecy. He was imitating Daniel. And I think if we go back to Daniel chapter 7, we find it's very, very clearly stated that once that little horn is destroyed, then the kingdom is given to the saints. I see a very clear parallel in Daniel chapter 19, or actually Revelation chapter 19, where the beasts are being destroyed, and then the kingdom in Revelation chapter 20 is being given to the saints. I think 21 is a millennial passage. So I don't see, I'm going to side with J. Stuart Russell on this, and I'm going to side with Ken Gentry on this, and I'm going to side with some of the other post-millennialists on this. I think that there's strong evidence that the millennium began in AD 70, but I don't think it ended in AD 70. So I think Ken Gentry has done great work on that, and I don't need to. I mean, he's got a 2-volume commentary on Revelation. I don't think it's been beat as far as scholarly material. Scholarly, I mean, it's just packed with information, and he does a very good job in going through all of the millennial arguments. He goes through them one by one, and he just completely clears the field for, I think, future researchers. Now, it may take 20 or 30 years for people to catch up to his system, but he made a very good point, and he ties it back to Daniel. He ties it back to other prophecies, and he says, "Look, this is obviously what's happening in these passages, and it doesn't really make sense, to to build on an Augustinian platform, which is really what the Church of Christ people did. And they were admittedly they were taking the system that was given to them by Campbell and Stone, who were amillennialists, and they simply just took that as their default eschatology. But I think if you look back at Augustinianism, you'll find that Augustine really he wasn't really exegeting those passages. He didn't know any Greek, he didn't know any Hebrew. He kind of was doing a lot of guesswork, and I think the premillennialists got that part right, but where they failed was they didn't see that the parousia, or at least presumptively the parousia, was fulfilled in the first century. And that's something that we could go through, a little later. Is, do we know that the parousia, do we know that a parousia was fulfilled in the first century? Good questions. But as you know, Tristan, there's a lot of debate on it. And some people are going to tell you yes. There's some people are going to tell you no. There's some people are going to tell you, hey, look, Bertrand Russell was right. And these are failed prophecies. And we need to just, shut up and suck it up, so to speak.
Well, there are some scholars, I know that you're aware of them, who do hold to failed prophecy, and they still remain Christian. And of course, there's this rationalization behind it. And of course, in my humble opinion, there's an attempt to rationalize everything, to make sense of it all, especially when faith is the basis of one's theology, the basis of one's worldview. But like I said before, once you see those time tags, once you see the expectancy, you can't unsee it. Well, let me go ahead and ask you this. As far as, what are your theological positions now? If you had to choose one eschatology, I think you have the right to have your own version at this point. I think those who've been in this for such a long time, they know full preterism, they know all the arguments of from the futurists, from the partial preterists. What is your eschatological views now? I mean, do you have like your own kind of customized version, which everybody in a sense has their own customized version, or whose camp do you belong to at this point?
Well, I think I would take more of a hybrid position, but I simply just call my system, well, if it's a system at all, I call it presentism, because I believe that, and this goes back to talks that I had with Alan Bondar, and he was throwing some great points at me. And I said, we got to listen to these guys too, because these guys are coming out with some good stuff. I mean, if God's just sitting up there in the sky on a throne watching, murderers and child rapists and all these people with not doing anything, not judging anyone, we've got problems. And so I came to the conclusion, I think it dawned on me one day when I was reading some of the passages, and it came to my realization. And I think there's a number of passages, but I'll just give you one in 2 Timothy chapter 4, where Paul says, I do fully testify then before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who is about to judge living and dead at his manifestation and his reign. It dawned on me, I said, wait a minute, living and dead. He's going to judge dead people. That doesn't mean resurrected people. That means dead people. So what is going on with this scene in Revelation 20 with the great white throne being set up? And shortly all men are going to be judged by their works. He's coming soon to judge all men. But it says in Revelation chapter 20, it says the great white throne. It says the dead, small and great, are standing before the throne. I said, there's no way that this means resurrected people. These are dead people standing before the throne to be judged based on their works. And then they go to either the first resurrection or the second death. Now, I personally think, and I can't prove it, I personally believe that whole passage has been tampered with at some point. We know that there's been some edits made to Revelation, and that were made to Revelation in the early centuries. I don't think we know exactly that there have been any edits to that particular passage, but I would strongly argue for a concurrency between, say, the great white throne, the millennium, the first resurrection, all those things being concurrent throughout the millennium. And it ties back to Daniel chapter 12, where you have it looks like a great white throne. It looks like a parallel to Revelation chapter 20, where after the great tribulation, now you have a resurrection, some going to Aeonian life and some going to Aeonian judgment. But it doesn't say anything about, it says sleep in the dust. but that could simply be a figurative way of saying, in the Hadean realm. I don't know, but that's the view that I lean towards, is that everything's being sorted out now through a process of judgment. It's either, look, we're going to be judged in this life, or we're judged immediately upon death. But I'm looking for my judgment to take place at death. I'm not looking for some judgment, 10,000 years from now. I'm looking for a judgment to take place at death. And
Yeah.
of course, if the skeptics are right and nothing happens, well, that's the way it is. But I'm not looking for some kind of cataclysmic, day of judgment where somehow there's going to be all these bodies raised and then everybody's judged together and then the world gets burned up. I think undoubtedly, I think that's what the author of Second Peter was saying. I think that's what he believed was going to happen. But I don't think that's what John is. I think John is saying that when the heavens and earth pass away, when the state passes away and we get out of it, we
Mm.
go, the world ends when we die, whether it ends physically for everybody else or not. When we die, the world ends. And there was another passage in Hebrews chapter 9 saying, it is appointed unto men once to die, and after this, the judgment. In Revelation chapter, I want to say it was chapter 14. I'd have to go back and look, but it says, blessed are the dead that die in the Lord, from henceforth their deeds will follow them. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 28 says, they shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man come in his kingdom. So that means they'll taste of death
Right.
afterwards. So it's not like there's this, it's this end of the world scenario. But anyways, that led me to that view. But I'm still open enough to say, well, maybe there's going to be, maybe there will be a bodily resurrection. I don't know. But I think if you look at Revelation 20, I don't think it's in the text. I don't think it says anything about dead bodies. Now, I will be fair enough, and I'll say that I did some debates a couple of years ago, and I asked a number of individuals. I'm not going to mention names, but I asked a number of individuals. I said, "Why are you saying that there's everybody is judged before the great white throne? Every single person who ever lived, but it said the rest of the dead lived not. It didn't say, if I owe you $20, I give you $5 this week. I pay you the rest of the money next week. It excludes the $5 that I already gave you. The people who were partakers of the first resurrection, they don't need another resurrection. They've already been resurrected. It's the people who didn't make it to the first resurrection. Those are the people that need that resurrection. So they're thrown into the lake of fire during the 1,000 years. And then presumably at some point after the 1,000 years, that's when the purification has taken place. That's when they receive their bodies. Now, Origen was right on point with that when he said that's what the lake of fire is for purification purposes. But of course, Augustinianism is not going to believe that. They believe that it's a terminus ad quem, that it's the end of history, it's the end of everything, and that's when the new heaven and earth are established. But again, you look at Revelation chapter 21 and you look at Isaiah chapters 65 and 66, looks like there's a lot of stuff going on in the new heaven and new earth that doesn't agree with the common orthodox scheme where everything, history ends at the great white throne. Looks like that things are still going on after that. So that's why I would say that the full preterists are right. Full preterists are right about that. They're saying the new heavens and new earth are now. And I would say, well, Doug Wilson or Ken Gentry or someone else might say that the new heavens and new earth are going on right now, but there's another one in the future. We could cut that off, and I don't think we'd be any the worse for it if we took that second one that they're tacking on, and we say, why don't we get rid of that and just say that there will be a restitution of all things in the future, but we don't know what it's going to look like. Does it have to entail the destruction of the physical cosmos? I don't think so. I think all he would have to do is just remove the curse. I mean, the earth was created, everything was good, and then the earth was subsequently, as the story goes, subsequently cursed. Well, why can't he just remove the curse? Why does he have to destroy the planet? So this is something that Before I hand it back to you, I just wanted to say with Bertrand Russell, I think that he had a point, because if you take all of these things in a literal sense, you would have to say they're failed prophecies. Now, my problem with the literal sense is that the writers were not going by a Copernican cosmography. They were going by a Mesopotamian cosmography. And
Yeah.
I think, a dead giveaway that the stars will fall to heaven, or the stars will fall from heaven to earth. We know that the stars are many, many times, some stars are millions of times larger than the earth. The earth would evaporate
Yeah.
from sheer heat long before the stars ever made contact. This is somebody who was going by Mesopotamian cosmography. They were
Yeah.
thinking, okay, the earth is an oblong plane bounded by the horizon on all sides, and then surmounted by this dome, this rakia, this firmament, in which are fixed the heavenly bodies. And so whether they some, I think, thought that it was glass, some thought that it was like a bronze material. But when the heat gets there, the elements melt. That's when all of these stars begin to fall, or when it gets shaken. That's when you start having these stars fall to earth. That's Mesopotamian cosmography. That's got nothing to do with Copernican system. The Copernican system, and there's no way to convert it either. The Copernican system would be completely different. So, going back to infallibility and inerrancy, I think there's going to be people that are going to argue strongly and say that no, he wasn't teaching that that the Earth was flat. They weren't teaching that the Earth was surmounted by a rakia, by a physical firmament, in which there's the windows of heaven. He opens the windows, and that's when the rain comes. And of course, it's a flat Earth, so after a certain period of time, that's when the floodwaters rise. They don't disperse over the rest of the globe. I mean, you could have prolonged the flood for 100 years, and the water wouldn't have risen above the hills. But if you have a flat Earth, you have windows in heaven, you have those opened, and that's when the water comes and everything goes up above the mountains. This is obviously the system that they were going by. They were going by a Mesopotamian cosmography. Now, my point with the literality of it all is, if this is literal, you wouldn't need any time texts or anything. It would simply be a self-refute. It would carry its own refutation. Well, these things are never going to happen. They didn't happen in the first century. They're never going to happen, because the writers were going by a Mesopotamian cosmography, which science has debunked. Science has debunked this. These things are never going to happen unless they were being used in a figurative or metaphorical sense. This is where the preterists, I think, get their foot in the door, because there are unquestionable instances in the Old Testament where these terms are used in a metaphorical sense. There's quite a few of them. And this is something that I think is common in poetry. Even John Milton, even Shakespeare, where they'll use something from a figure from, say, Greek mythology, and they'll say, Phoebus is rising and he's bringing his chariots. That didn't mean that they believed in Greek mythology, but they were taking those figures from Greek mythology. They were using it in a metaphorical sense, or they were using it to enhance the aesthetic appeal of that particular poem or work of literature which they were writing. But this is common within poetry. This is common in Hebrew poetry. This is common in Middle Eastern poetry, and it's something that I think that scholars would do well to note. I think Joyce Carol Oates, at one point, she came to this position, and she said, scholars are not taking any of this into account. They don't have literary sensitivity enough to understand that when Babylon was destroyed, or when Egypt was destroyed and the stars were darkened, that the writers weren't saying that these things would actually happen. They were using poetic language, taking things which were true, or which were presumed to be true, of the Mesopotamian cosmography, and applying them in a metaphorical or figurative in a figurative way to something else that would be paralleled in the rise or in the downfall of nations, peoples, and kingdoms. So eventually, I think she got so turned off by all the infighting and the bickering among Christians that she finally said, "You guys can have it. I'm not going to identify with this religion anymore because you people are crazy." But at one point, I remember she was strongly leaning into the preterist camp, and again, Sproul. You've got Gentry. You've got Doug Wilson. You've got James Jordan. They're all Orthodox, right? But they believe, they understand, they have the literary sensitivity to understand that these figures are used in these words and expressions are used in a figurative sense. So literality, perhaps, but if it weren't for those passages in the Old Testament, I think that the Bertrand Russell position would be it would be close, like you said. You could still be a Christian, but you would pretty much have to lean into that position.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, they were, the New Testament writers were imitating the style, the poetic and figurative style of the Old Testament, now the preterists have something. I think that kind of evens the playing field for the preterists, because there are instances in the Old Testament where those expressions occur. What do you think?
I think, that there are certain passages that you can argue are metaphoric, but when it comes to First Thessalonians 4, the Lord descending from heaven with a shout, we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with the dead to meet him in the air to forever be with him. That is just, I cannot see how anybody can place a metaphor on that, which they do arbitrarily, especially the Greek scholars. In my debate with Don, I even quoted the three primary Greek scholars that he brought up in his own literature, namely that Greek term apontesis, and it was Moulton, Cosby, and Eddy. And neither of them agree that apontesis is used in a metaphoric sense with First Thessalonians 4. But, that doesn't solve the full preterists or debunk them. Even that's just only CBV. I think that the CBV full preterist, the corporate covenant body view resurrection, is just extremely erroneous. I think that it's going to be obsolete in the next decade or two to come. I don't see it going further. I think if somebody's going to be a full preterist, and I've spoke with other full preterists as well, even former full preterists, that IBV is the only sensible way to remain a full preterist. But yeah, that metaphoric language, when they start adding that to First Thessalonians 4, I think it's absolutely terrible. And then, of course, you get into, how did they experience that metaphor, right? If it's metaphoric language and you have all of these statements that no commentator, no church father, no Christian scholar ever stated before. So, I'm with you. I do see the strong arguments from full preterism. That's why it kind of took us hook, line, and sinker when we were going through our theological journey. But once you see that there's a lot of these exegetical and ontological errors with this metaphoric language galore, it's like then everything becomes metaphor, which I believe that if you're going to be in covenant eschatology, if you're going to be a CBV full preterist, you have to become a covenant creationist, because if you're saying that you're resurrected and you're restored back to that position of fellowship, how Adam was before he fell, well, then why is there still sin in the world? Then you'd have to believe, and I asked Don this in the debate, you'd have to believe that pre-fallen Adam, if you're taking Adam and Eve literally, what other sins could he have done? And Don rejected Thomas Aquinas. He rejected all the patristics, and every Christian theologian that talked about Adam in his pre-fallen state, that he was so morally pure. But Don said he could have done other sins. I ran this through Sam Frost after the debate. He said Don lost his mind. So this means that Adam in his pre-fallen state, and again, I'm taking the conservative, basic, fundamental view of Genesis, that this was literally, a man and a woman. They talked to a serpent, they ate the fruit, and that's what introduced sin into the world. Don had clearly stated in our debate that no, Adam could have done other sins in his free will moral agency, that he could have, murdered Eve, he could have tortured animals, he could have, possibly killed himself. And that would not have brought covenantal death, because the only sin that would have brought covenantal death was eating the fruit. So I said all that to say this, that the fact that sin is still existing within our neuropsychology, even if you're a full preterist, even if you're a Christian, it shows that you're not fully restored how it was back in the Garden of Eden, in that place of paradise. They would have to adopt some sort of covenant creation, some sort of mythological, allegorical approach to Adam. They can't believe that Adam and Eve were real people. And then when they ate the fruit, that's what warped the minds of humanity. Kind of like in tandem with Romans, they eventually became idolaters, right? They started making corruptible images. They became homosexuals, and then so forth. It starts saying what happened as a result of all of these, this sin that was entered into the world. So that's another Achilles heel in my humble opinion. But what can I say? Everybody has their journeys in and out of full preterism. I just had Elvin Israel on yesterday, and we spoke about this. Um, and to me, when I speak to full preterists, the number one issue that I get is they've never read Max King, and they've never read the literatures from Dawn. And they matter. They are the head honchos in this full preterist movement. Of course, there's William Bell and a few others, but as a matter of fact, I think Sam Frost was talking about this. Like, you can't just reject Dawn and Max King like they were nobodies. They took this movement somewhere. Author of over 30 books, I believe, Dawn has. So to me, nobody is going to surpass him anytime soon. So what he says, yeah, I do believe he has the authority over all the other full preterists. That's just my opinion. So when you expose the head honcho, then you've exposed them all. Otherwise, you're going to have to keep reforming this thing. But that's just my humble opinion. I would like to see more full preterists step up to the plate. But that's my challenges that I get with the full preterists, that a lot of times they just understand audience relevance and the time text, and that's it. They think they have it figured out. And it's not that easy. This is very, very complex. But the challenge that the full preterist camp has is that they're going to have to somehow, pick and choose which constituent elements apply to them after 70 AD, after their 70 AD paradigm. And so that's, to me, those are the challenges that I think that full preterism faces. But if you're going to remain a Christian, I don't know, Brian, maybe, you can give me some insight. Can you be a full preterist and still be a Christian? Because you could still be a Christian as far as the ethics is concerned. Like, if you want to imply the Sermon on the Mount, and the morals and the principles of the Christian ethic, yes. But I don't believe Christianity will ever accept full preterism. I think it will always be deemed as heresy, namely because they are apologetically fighting for the existence of evil. They're stating this affirmatively, that according to intelligent design creationism, that evil will in fact perpetuate. And it's like, Christianity is never going to buy that, in my humble opinion. And I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, yeah, I agree. I think that, full preterism is something that I was a full preterist for about 15 months at one point. It's going back again 20 years ago. But I think the biggest problem with full preterism is, again, what you've pointed out, the persistence of evil, is that Christ never really gets any decisive victory over evil. I mean, we see evil happening now. We see horrible things happening, but this goes back sort of to the conversations that I had with Alan Bandar, where he's got some good points. Well, you have evil in this world, but my persistent objection against, say, skepticism would backfire if I held to a full preterist position, because even if it's rectified, say you have a murderer who doesn't get punished in this life, but he immediately gets punished when he crosses the waters of death. When he crosses to the other side, then he's punished. But on a human plane, it's never rectified. So why,
Yeah.
now you have a contradiction where, well, he can do it on an individual level. If it's bad enough for him to send somebody to eternal perdition for a life of sin on an individual level, what is he doing on a human plane? He's not doing. It's going to keep going on forever. So he never really gets any kind of decisive victory. Now, I do believe that, I think that, and this is why I lean more towards a post-millennial way of looking at things, because I do think there is ultimately going to be a final victory over sin and evil. It's certainly not going to issue in the, the mass destruction of, three-fourths of humanity, the way the Calvinists think it or the
Yeah.
Augustinians think it, but it
Yeah.
is gonna fix the problem that was created in the fall. So we can go back and, there's scholars who will think, as they'll say, well, these are not to be taken literally. These are not literal histories. I mean, you could say that it's mythology, and yet it still can contain a transcendent message. I think some of the metaphysical poets understood. William Blake, William Wordsworth understood that. Exile from Eden is a real process. It happens in life. We all start off in a state of innocence, and then we end up going astray. And how do we get back to that state of innocence? How do we get back to that Garden of Eden? You could take it in that sense and not even be a Christian. You could simply take it in a poetic sense. But as far as saying, well, now all humanity has been compromised through this fall, which I think we know from experience that all humanity does have. We have issues. We have issues that we need help, right? We need more help than nature can give us. And saying that that Christ came, now you have the guy that's going to fix the problem, but he never fixes the problem. He lets it go on. Well, you should have just, if you weren't going to fix the problem, you should have not prevented it before it became a problem. So, is all kinds of apologetic issues that come with that package. At least the futurists, I will give it to them, at least the futurists and the universalists as well, but the futurists will at least say he's going to fix the problem. He's going to fix the problem. Now, we see evil around us all the time, but he's going to fix the problem. If he's not fixing it now, he's going to fix it in the future. I would take that as a better sell to humanity, because now at least we've got something. We have a victory. Whereas if he's constantly making headway against a force that's never going to be defeated, then there is no real victory. So it's not a winning theology. We want to be on the winning team. If the team's gonna, if it's gonna end in a draw, I mean, who the hell wants that? Come back next week and we'll do it again. But if you don't have a victory, a decisive victory, was like we're the winners and those guys over there are the losers, then there's no message for humanity. There's no gospel. That's not good news. That's something that you would want to, try to cover up and, just kind of pretend it's not there. It's not good news for humanity.
It's not, and so therefore full preterism is the embodiment. It's the eschatological embodiment of evil, because it is apologetically, indirectly fighting for its existence. It has to state that, yes, it will perpetuate affirmatively, and this is part of God's intelligent design. It's a terrible message for humanity. And, in my debate with Don, I waited 2 years to tell him this, that's what your doctrine is essentially teaching. That's the brass tacks of it. That what is it in the most practical sense? If we're in the new heavens, the new earth, and yet you still have evil in that element, then I mean, what can you say? I mean, you're it's the only eschatology in all of Christianity that believes this, and I think it should raise red flags. It's not good news, in that sense. And look, somebody says, well, when you die, you still go to heaven. Well, Christianity already believes that. So the full preterists are not giving anything that Christianity has not already provided for humanity. The only thing they're giving us is a paradigm shift on the return of Christ, and a paradigm shift that, well, this God will never right this wrong. And so now they're going up against, Christian philosophers who are battling atheists, skeptics, agnostic, those who are against the faith, using the existence of evil, like Bertrand Russell. But the full preterists are saying, hey, let's not even debate that, because that's all part of God's intelligent design. And that's terrible. And this is why Sam Frost left. That was one of the reasons why I decided to leave full preterism. And so, what can you say? One of the things we were talking about 1 Thessalonians 4, it just hit me. Now, I don't know, Brian, please correct me if I'm wrong. If you've ever heard anybody bring this argument up, maybe somebody has, but the CBV full preterists state that in the Old Testament, in the Hebraic mind, in that metaphoric language, there was no rapturing of the church or a disappearance of the church. I mean, I know you've heard this many times before. That's not what the Old Testament taught. And it just came to me. I said, well, neither does it ever teach, if that's not the case, neither does it ever teach that the ascension of Christ is in the Old Testament. You don't see the ascension of Christ, which was a physical ascension. You don't see that in the Old Testament. So if they're stating, well, we don't see the church being taken up and literally meeting Christ in the Old Testament, it's just metaphoric language for a covenantal restoration. Well, then neither do you see the ascension of Christ, which is in a sense like a rapture or like a physical taken away from this planet. So, well, have you heard of that before? Because that just came to me like a day ago. I'm thinking, well, if they're saying, well, that's checkmate, so nothing that Paul quotes or nothing in the New Testament can support a literal taking away of the church or a literal meeting with Christ of the church. Well, nothing in the Old Testament says anything about the Messiah literally being taken up. You could try to argue and say it's crucified and resurrecting on the third day exactly. But where in the Old Testament does any of this Hebraic metaphoric language talk about Christ ascending up into heaven? Have you heard of this before?
No, but I think from what you described, I think the main error with that argument from my standpoint would be it's assuming that everything in the New Testament must be in the Old Testament. I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know if
yeah,
we can postulate that. We may be able to say, well, there's a great deal of it that can be found in the Old Testament, but some things
yes,
we know, and even the skeptics will point out and say, well, he was recontextualizing a lot of Old Testament prophecies, so he
exactly.
was putting his own little twist on a lot of these prophecies. I don't know. It's a difficult. I wouldn't want to put that on my plate. I think that would be too much. I don't think it's a good argument, but you know, they're coming out with new stuff like every week. I lost track many years ago, even trying to keep on top. I think what you've mentioned though with First Thessalonians chapter 4 is a good point, because now you have the difference between an experiential rapture, whatever that may consist of, and something what they're describing, which is something that's non-experiential, that doesn't take place even on a cognitive level. So it's something that could happen, but you wouldn't know that it would happen. So it's really there's no difference between that and a failed prophecy. Because a
Yeah,
failed prophecy where you don't get anything, you don't see anything, you don't experience anything. The same
right.
thing with this. You don't get anything, you don't see anything, you don't experience anything. How do you know it's not a failed prophecy? Well, they couldn't tell. So they're assuming that it's a fulfilled prophecy. But when you're dealing with when you're dealing with prophecies, you can't take those chances, because if something didn't happen, you would necessarily be compelled to wait for it to happen further down the road. And
Yeah,
that's been the invariable experience of the Hebrew writers when they didn't see this great prophecy come to pass. Well, maybe Hezekiah is going to be the Messiah. Maybe
yeah,
it's going to be Zerubbabel is going to be the Messiah. Well, you get a few hundred years down the road, they're still waiting for the Messiah. So, no, let's let those guys go to bed. We're still waiting for these prophecies to be fulfilled. So in a situation like that, you would necessarily want to have some kind of way of telling if those prophecies came to pass. If we go back to Paul's language, we find very clearly he's talking about something that's going to be experienced. So we don't know, we could debate with the full preterist what that consists of, what it looks like, what it feels like on a I guess a cognitive plane, but it's got to be something that's experiential, because Paul was telling them to wait for it. He
yeah,
was telling them that this is something that we're going to be waiting for, and he even brought it to a cognitive level, I believe, in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, where he said, then we will see face to face. Now we know it. Then we will know even as we are known. So he's using this language specifically geared towards a cognitive or experiential manifestation. To say
right.
that that's not what he meant is it's really insulting people's intelligence, and it's placing a false interpretation on a very clear one. I think it's doing damage to people's obviously to people's mental health and well-being. I really believe that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, look, well, let me ask you on a personal level. I mean, I would love to see you engage more in debates. Are there any debates lined up for you? I remember you were telling me how you were you were pursuing a degree, correct? A theology degree. I mean, what's been up to date with that?
Well, I'm still working on it, but I will tell you one thing. I got out of the debate field because I really didn't have the time.
Yeah.
And the people that I was, there's a point where you have to look, say, either I'm getting somewhere or I'm not getting somewhere. And for me, arguing theology was getting to a point where I felt that it was wasting my time. And
Okay.
so where I am right now is I'm camped over in more in the arts and cultural side of things. But
Very
I'm
nice.
also thinking that perhaps in the future I may do some of that. But to be honest with you, I mean, if I'm just going to be going against some bozo that's just gonna you know uh, come up with some interpretations out of a hat and say, well, this is how it is, and these guys, the scholars don't matter, the patristics don't matter. I don't need that. I don't think anybody needs. I think it's making Christianity look like a bunch of fools, and
Yeah.
I just didn't want to contribute to that anymore. I don't think it's healthy, and I think it's defeating the purpose. I really do.
I get it. I get it 1,000%. I do believe that these open live discussions are beneficial, and you're part of those one percenters. There's literally less than 1% of all of Christians in the world who actually know this advanced level of theology the way that you do. So, I spoke to Alan Bondar, he's the same way. Those who understand the systematics of eschatology, which not a lot of churchgoers even spend the time to do. To me, you're somebody who has the portals to the matrix. But let me go ahead and let me address some of the comments here. We have Jack Shadow. He says, "Does Brian believe that one day Jesus will physically come down from the sky?"
Well, actually, I do personally believe that there's going to be an open manifestation. So yeah, I do believe that, but it's going to be in connection with say Zechariah chapter 14, which I think does take place after the millennium. But that's what I believe on that.
Okay. We have Richie here. I believe you know who he is. He's been on your podcast before. How do we change before Christianity? How much do we change before Christianity is no longer Christianity? I think he was gearing that towards the full preterists. That's exactly what happens here. They are changing literally almost everything. I mean, you're looking at intelligent design creationism. You're looking at the resurrection. You're looking at the nature of the return of Christ. I mean, even the datings of the books, they're going against the large consensus of Christian scholarship, which they have been on record stating that Revelation was being circulated during the time of Peter. I mean, maybe they can pull some quote scholars out. Like I remember you stated before, Brian, everybody has their own scholars when it comes to opinion, right? I mean, what is a scholar? It's somebody who paid to get something published, and it just so happened to catch a little fire, got a little viral a little bit, and it's on the shelf in a university with all the other incoherent, contradicting theologies, but it's up there on the shelf, right? So everybody could appeal to their scholars, right? But this is why I think. Having the large consensus, but then again, you have Eastern Orthodox, you have the Catholic Church. I mean, now that we're here, what is your views on Eastern Orthodoxy, Catholicism at this point? There are, if I could bring this up, there were some who were saying that are you Roman Catholic, or did you return or go back to Roman Catholicism? Somebody was telling me this months ago.
I was raised in the Catholic Church, so
I remember.
I wasn't a very good Catholic. I will grant you that, but that's my cultural heritage. That's so I understand the high church position. I mean, I have a lot of respect for the Catholic Church. I think they're engaging with culture in a way that the Protestants are not. Eastern Orthodoxy, I think they make some great points. I just don't, you know, it's difficult for me to say, well, these guys are all right and everybody else is, I think everybody's got some things right and some things wrong. And I don't think I can agree with any one party within Christendom to say, well, I'm going to join this camp. I think I'm going to join them all. I'd love to join them all. I'd love to fellowship with the Eastern Orthodox, with the Catholics, with the Presbyterians, with the Lutherans, with the Methodists. I'd love to join all of these groups and get in there and just rotate. They won't
Yeah.
let me. They
Yeah, they
won't.
won't let, yeah.
They won't let me. You got to do one at a time, and that's fine. But one at a time is great. Let's do it one at a time. I'll be there when I be there. When I get there, I'll get there. So yeah, but I love them all.
Good. Hey, likewise, you know what I mean? I tell people all the time, I don't take any of this, theology business personal, just so long as you're not hurting anybody. This is theology talk, and people change their views over time. It's a journey. And I'm just grateful that we get to exercise these civil liberties, of, religious differences, but then we get to have a dialogue, and we discuss them. I'm always open-minded, to change my views. And there's people who, I don't know if you know who Nigel Taylor is. He was
Yeah,
somebody who was, yeah, he went back to Christianity. I had him on my podcast. So I'm happy if he's happy. Hey, then I'm happy too. I like to hear more reasons from him. But I think that these views are extremely important to the human race. People base their lives off of eschatology. I remember, what was it, a couple months ago, the rapture was supposed to happen.
oh yeah,
Yeah, wasn't it the 23rd or something like
yeah,
that?
yeah,
Yeah, and I couldn't believe that here comes this man. Even Derek Lambert was making clips on him. People are making clips on him all around, right? That people were following this man. Like, how many of these men have to come in humanity making these statements, and how much money are they getting? How many thousands of people are they deceiving? You see, that's the part where I'm just saying, okay, somebody needs to stop this. This is where full preterism comes in, even partial preterists. Gary DeMar, he's somebody who's, he seems to be backing up the full preterist movement. He was on Mike Sullivan's podcast, I think a year ago, and he was agreeing with everything Mike was saying. And I told Gary DeMar on Facebook, him and I had a little exchange. I said, look, Gary, I respect you, but I saw you on Mike Sullivan's podcast. I saw the whole thing, and you were agreeing with everything he was stating. But to my understanding, Gary DeMar does believe in a bodily return of Christ.
yeah.
And so long as you are believing in a bodily return of Christ, then you can't be a full preterist. But it's kind of difficult to agree with their exegesis, their CBV exegesis. And yet, I don't know. You have all these different varieties, all these different versions. I don't know where humanity is going to be 50 years from now, 100 years from now.
Uh,
I mean, what
I'll
new?
be-
I mean, that's another one, something
I
new.
won't be
And
here. You will. You might be here, but I know I won't. Not in 50 years. I think it's going to get worse. I really do. I think it's going to get worse. It's going to, and this is where, Richie and folks like that, this is where I respect them. Look, at least you're with the church that's going to be teaching the same thing 50 years from now.
yeah,
You've got a foundation. And so that's good. If you just have a book, like I said to someone else a couple weeks ago, if sola scriptura is correct, basically God gave us a Ferrari, but He didn't give us the key.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
he
That's
has a
good. Yeah,
perfect, beautiful car, brand new, the works, fully loaded, but he didn't give us the key. You would need an infallible interpreter. And this is where I think that the Catholic Church, and to some extent the Eastern Orthodox Church, why they're getting so many converts, because now you need someone who can interpret authoritatively the Word of God. You can't just have everything based on a book. A book
right.
is simply not enough. You need other things. And so I
Yeah,
appreciate those arguments. At the same time, at what point does the institutional church overstep their not their authority, but overstep their bounds, their rational bounds? And we could start getting into transubstantiation and other things,
yeah,
which cause problems, which have caused problems
yeah.
in Western culture. So, it's a trade-off. You're trading something in for something that's going to give you optimal security out in one area, but then it's not going to be as good in another department. So it's something that it's just a life decision that we have to make. I don't blame anybody for going down the EO path. I don't blame anyone for going down the Presbyterian path or the Lutheran path or the
Yeah,
Baptist path. It's
yeah.
whatever works for that individual. And it's based largely on people's experiences and also on their psychological makeup and their education and their faith upbringing. So
Oh,
there's
yeah.
a lot of things that go into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Somebody said here, yeah, Richie said here, I would say as long as someone adheres to the Nicene Constantinople Creed, they are a Christian. I would say if somebody's willing to die for Christ, then to me they're a Christian. Like if there were Muslim terrorists and they came over here and they said you either recant your faith or you die, and they chose death. To me, that is a Christian. I mean, there are plenty of Christians in the first century didn't even know how to read. The majority of Christians all throughout church history didn't know how to read. And yet, I believe that they would be willing to die for Christ. But I do believe that sound doctrine is extremely important. I do believe can it be essential for salvation? I mean, yeah, you can argue and say yes. And you could say, well, what if they don't know? You know, what if they just know what was being taught to them because of the limitations of culture or society, just like medieval times? So to me, if somebody is willing to die for Christ, that proves their sincerity. They may not even understand the ins and outs of theology. But to me, that is what a true Christian is, in my humble opinion. That's just me. Here, Jack Shadow states, not a second coming. The Messiah only comes once in the Old Testament. And you know what? That's actually a very good point. The Messiah only comes once in the Old Testament. This is why in the New Testament, you see, Brian, like what you said, like Paul and the New Testament authors, they're reforming these Old Testament prophecies and they're adding on a new revelation to it. They're even adding on things that the Old Testament authors didn't even think of. And only those New Testament authors have that right to do so. So yeah, we don't see the Messiah coming twice in the Old Testament, but we really don't see the Messiah robing himself in flesh and dying on the cross and resurrecting the third day, and ascending up into heaven, which we see in the New Testament, right? So you have all these revampings, all these reforms in the New Testament, and that is just something that we see anthropologically speaking. Human beings they grab an already established a priori religion and they add on another revelation to it. It would be kind of like, and the full preterists have been accused of Mormonism, right? They've been in tandem with Mormonism. They state that everybody fell into apostasy, which is something that Paul wasn't saying. He wasn't saying that the prophets were apostate, but he is saying that this is the fulfillment of that. And by his divine authority, he gets to add on this new revelation, whatever it is that Christ was giving him, the Holy Spirit. But the full preterists, yes, they have been compared to Mormonism because they have to state that the entire church got it wrong. And this is why I've criticized saying you have failed saints. If Christ is not a failed prophet, then you have failed saints. They fail to preserve the truth of full preterism. No matter how you want to slice it and dice it, there were no full preterists in the first century. The gates of hell prevailed against the church. Doctrinally speaking, the gates of hell prevailed because all the full preterists were extinguished. And then it wasn't until, J. Stuart Russell, Max King, and the rest of them. So you have failed saints because everybody else got it wrong. God was supposed to send forth strong delusions in the last days. And I guess according to the full preterists, that included his own bride, that included the church, the Christians, they were delusional too. And you can say, no, well, how do you know there wasn't full preterists in the first century? That's true. It's an argument from silence, which means that still there's no evidence that there are any full preterists that existed. So they failed to preserve the Hebraic mind. They failed to preserve the hermeneutic. But I guess, arguments like that, it just, to a lot of full preterists, it just doesn't matter. So long as they have audience relevance, time statements, and there was fulfillment some way, somehow. The how factor doesn't really matter to many of them. But what can I say? Oh, look, we have Dr. Steve Cox in here. Let's see. He states it may have been written to give a certain people hope. Then it had components of even modern day Jewish worldview, which is salvation to the world. Yes, I mean it could have been a process. It could have been reformed in the New Testament authors. Brian, did you want to touch on anything?
No, but there's some good points that are being made, and I agree that there's many ways we could view the prophecies. I don't think I don't think we should view them monolithically.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why I respect the post mills, because the post mills will take this. They'll take the time text seriously. They'll take the figurative language seriously, but they're also smart enough to look at passages like 1 Thessalonians 4, and to look at other passages, and to look at the creeds and the traditions of Christendom that have been handed down, and to say, okay, but we need to keep this within the bounds of Christianity. So I think they're going to be the ones in the future at least in the future of Protestantism, they're going to be the ones who carry the torch. I don't think the millennials are really going to make out well. But
Mm.
again, this, you see ups and downs all the time, and a lot of this is happening in the seminaries. A lot of this is happening in theological departments where, okay, well, post millennialism may not be very well represented, but we know that amillennialism is. So maybe amillennialism will get some, we'll get some traction, some more traction. They're still going to have a hard time dealing with the time texts.
Yeah. Yep.
That's that's they're going to be
Yeah.
their problem is, well, why was he telling them to wait and watch for his coming? If they were at the beginning of the millennium, he couldn't come for at least 1,000 years. So that invalidates everything. That totally brings
Yeah.
the whole tent down. And that's what I
Right.
don't think they understand is, okay, well, the millennium started in AD 30, but then Christ was to, you have all these time texts. Well, wait a minute. If we're at the beginning of the millennium, we've still got over 1,000 years to go. He
Right.
can't come back. There's no way. So why are you telling people to watch for him? Why are you even watching and waiting for him if he can't come back for at least 1,000 years? It
Yeah.
carries its own refutation. At least with postmillennialism, you can get those time texts in there, and then
Yeah.
you could say, okay, well, then there's after the millennium, then you have a great white throne, then you have the new heavens and new earth. Makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And you debated Sam Frost on the Millennium, correct?
I think so. I think so. He made some good points though, and I will say that I kind of teased him over that, the parousia, you'll see, that you're waiting till death. But that
Yeah.
is actually it's an intelligent position, and there's other theologians who have brought that up too. And it's something I don't think I would have a problem with. I mean, if the parousia took place in AD 70, he's present with his church, but he's going to receive us when we die. I don't really see a problem with that. But then again, if that starts to impinge on doctrines like the resurrection and the second coming, then that might be a problem. So it's something to look into for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at this point in time, I do believe that futurism, yes, that is the correct position to say that, hey, no, it hasn't happened yet, but we're still going to wait for him to return. I think to say that it all took place is just a far stretch. But like the full preterists like to say they're being criticized for saving the savior. But what can you say? You have people who get into full preterism and then they go right back to dispensationalism or Eastern Orthodoxy. They go back to believing that Christ will one day bodily return. For me, yes, I do believe that's what the scripture was teaching, that he was going to return bodily. No, I don't believe it happened, and that's why the majority of Christianity has still been waiting for it. That's what it makes so much more sense, that they've been expecting that. But to say that everything is fulfilled is even with the IO preterists. They say that it's fulfilled. Now, I understand that sometimes in the heat of a dialogue, they'll say it was fulfilled in 70 AD to the full preterists. To just for the sake of argument, you just say if it was all fulfilled, then it ended. But like right here, you have Jack Shadow. Full preterism can only lead to IO, which we know. That's what it has led many people. IO preterism was the only logical, coherent position for me. Otherwise, it's a failed prophecy book, in my opinion. Let me see here. I think there was some more. Let's see. Okay, I think that's everything. Jack Shadow says partial preterism allows to have his cake and eat it too, but it's inconsistent. Okay. Yeah, and I think that's everybody. I think I saw somebody state that they used to be hold to fail prophecy, but not anymore. Yeah, right here, Israel only preterism. I don't know who this is. All prophecy was fulfilled. I used to hold to fail prophecy. You see, so when you say that it's all fulfilled, then you have to say, did the resurrection happen? Did this, however that took place, and everything else, with the absence of history, and then you'd have to believe that everybody got it wrong somehow, and that's just a little bit far stretch for me to believe that every single person got it wrong, especially the Greek and the expectancy. I mean that explains why the church fathers, and those in the first century, they were still expecting a bodily return of Christ.
Yeah.
But what can I say? There are different versions. And I'm excited to see what happens. It looks like for the future of full preterism, you have William Bell. You still have Don in here. Don's going to be debating Sam Frost. Him and Mike Sullivan are going to be debating Sam Frost and Jeremiah. I don't know how to say his last name, but it's going to be a team debate.
That's
But
good.
it looks like, yeah, it looks like Zach Davis. His subscribers are going up. I mean, he seems to be taking over. So we'll see what happens with the full preterist camp. I don't believe that they. It's maybe it's gaining popularity. Yeah, you can say it's growing a little bit in popularity, but I don't believe that Christianity will ever accept it. Um, it'd be interesting to see who's going to be publishing literature to be like on a world class level. There's no full preterist literature that's on a top university. You don't see that there. So it still remains very, very small. But Gary DeMar seems to be like that one scholar that has been given some credence to it, like at least some of the CBV exegesis from what I saw him and Mike Sullivan's podcast. But you know, I do think that this theology business is very, very important. And what can I say? It's going to be men like you that's going to make a difference. So I can't thank you enough, Brian. Just for your willingness to share what's been on your mind. I know you battle with a lot of people who sometimes they just they get very, very belligerent over things, and I don't like it when people think like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, oh, like you haven't read the literature, or like you haven't been in this, like it's crazy. You have these newbies that come in and they think they know it all, but that's just one of the challenges that I face, especially in the Facebook groups. But what can I say? I try to be as cordial, as nice to everyone as possible, especially the full preterists. But what can I say? It'd be interesting to see what the future holds, and how eschatology is going to develop. I think we need to see more debates. I think we need to see more open discussions. Gary DeMar had one with Doug Wilson, and I think Doug Wilson made a controversial statement stating that animals were going to be resurrected. I think Gary DeMar was like taking a dig at him, saying like, oh, here he believes that animals are going to be resurrected at the resurrection of Christ.
Hmm.
And some people say that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I heard a full preterist say that. Like, to me, the most ridiculous thing I ever heard from the full preterist was that the Christians all around the world were dancing in the streets when they were spiritually transformed and the Roman soldiers besieged Jerusalem. I mean, that
Right.
has been the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard, coming from the full preterist camp. And that dancing in the street statement, I mean, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it all around from the futurist camp, partial, even full preterists. I think it's a total embarrassment. I think it exposes a lot of that CBV view. And my journey, Brian. It took me about 2 years to get the answer to that question about the experiential factor and what in the world happened. What was that physical reaction, right? When that covenantal change took place. And the more I think about it, I wake up in the morning and I go, man, every time I see Don, every time I see Mike Sullivan, William Bell, I think of that dancing in the street statement. That is exactly to the T what they're replacing the rapture imagery with, or at least a visible, literal meeting with Christ. It's just I can't get over it. I think it's an absolute embarrassment. I think it's a complete dagger to the CBV view, and I think it's gonna be heard about for decades to come. That's my estimation.
I think you're right. And I just wanted to say one last thing is, I think the cultural plugins are really important to consider as well. Whatever theology we hold, we want to make sure that we are not hiding out from things like science, education, the arts,
Correct.
culture, civilization, because science is making advances. And I think that one of the things I learned over the years is that theology and philosophy don't progress the same way the exact sciences do. They develop more in spirals, where as the things that can be measured, the things that are capable of verification, those things might develop more in a straight line. So sometimes we go backwards, but we want to make sure that we're still plugged into culture. We want to make sure that we're not dismissing things like science, education, and the arts. If we're doing that, doesn't matter whether we're preterist, futurist, we're on the wrong side of the human equation. And so this is something that I've learned after 20 years of living in the South. I've learned that there are these coteries and small groups of humanity, which they're as orthodox as you could get, but they're seeking hideouts from civilization. And I think this is what we need to watch out for. So if your
Yeah.
theology is doing that to you, if your theology is preventing you from appreciating,
Yes.
even great progress made in the arts or in the sciences or in the education field or in other areas of the humanities, then you're
Yeah.
on the wrong side of the human equation. That would
Yes.
probably be my biggest, most important message that I've ever given anybody in a theological setting. It would go above anything that I've said on an exegetical level. It would go above anything I might have said on a devotional level, is make sure you stay connected to
Yes.
humanity. And that's all
Yes.
I can say.
Hey, amen to that, and that is the type of Christian theology that I've always embraced. I don't believe that you should just totally negate science, the culture, the arts, history. And if your theology is getting you away from that, what can I say? I mean, I think that's terrible. You're not benefiting humanity. You're excluding yourself from humanity. And that's the world class scholarship that I highly respect. Um, but what can I say? I mean, life's a journey, and some of the most intelligent people you're going to meet are going to be Christians and religious adherents, and unfortunately, some of the most unintelligent people are going to be Christians and religious adherents. And it's the same thing goes for anybody. It could be atheist, agnostic, whatever. I'm kind of, to be honest with you, I'm dabbling with phenomenology. I never thought that I would do this or get into this, but I heard a couple professors say, sometimes when you have the Western, mindset of logic and reason and everything has to fall into place, you get tired of that, right? It's like, but you're never going to find answers. You're going to keep asking, why does evil exist? Or what's the purpose of my life? Where do I go when I die? All these, different philosophical investigations. And it's just like, I can see where Herschel was getting into phenomenology. I'm not going to become a phenomenologist by any means, but I've heard of a few philosophers say, sometimes that can get tiring, and, you might want to consider a different type of worldview to kind of help your sanity, because it's like, we're never going to find the answers to these questions so far as we're concerned. Maybe some of them, you know, but what can I say? I'm not going to be a staunch evolutionist. I'm not going to be a staunch reductionist. I do believe that there is a transcendent world. I don't see why not. I hope that there is life after death. I don't see why not. And, I've said this to many, my Christian friends. I'm trying to be as sincere as possible, and if I'm wrong, I'm hoping that if God is the true God, and God is Yahweh, I'm hoping that He would have mercy on me. So when people ask me what should I pray for, I say just pray for my soul. That old pray for my soul. I'm on a journey, and I'm just trying to be honest here. That's just how I'm viewing the world. That's how I'm feeling. And if I'm wrong, I'm hoping that God will forgive me and have mercy on me. As morally and ethically, I'm still the same person as I was when I was in the faith. It pretty much, I'm. What can I say? I still love the Bible. I still love Bible theology until the day my casket closes. So, that's pretty much it. I mean, thank you, Brian, for coming on. Sharing what's on your mind. To me, you're a hallmark in the full preterist circles. And I'm excited to see what the future holds for you, and anybody who comes across you. I mean, like I said, you're like one of those who have the keys to the matrix. That's how I look at you. You're on a world class level, and to me, you're a theological gem, and you're a gift to humanity. So thank you, Brian, for being on my channel. My channel is entitled 21st Century Mind, and to me, you are in the embodiment of that. So thank you so very much. Any other closing statements?
I want to say thank you, Tristan. Again, I highly respect you. I think you've been doing a lot of great stuff, and you've got an excellent mind. And I think I like the way you challenge people. You continue to challenge people. You've challenged me. I'm sure you've challenged Sam and other people. And I think it's a great experience. It's been great knowing you and dealing with you. So I hope we can have more of these discussions, even, taking it to my channel again. I haven't
Of
done anything in
course,
several months, but I think we need to get something going,
we
because
do.
there's people that have wanted to share some thoughts or whatever, but we're going to have to do something soon.
Absolutely, Brian. You let me know when, and I'll be there. And if I don't have time, I will
Yeah.
make the time. If I don't
All
have
right.
time, I will make the time,
Yes,
because
sir.
I enjoy being on your channel. I remembered it was just a year and a half ago, I think, as when I
Yeah,
first appeared, at least a couple years ago. And the IO preterist versus the full preterist. It was by your channel that landed that debate with Dawn.
that's right.
So I can't thank you enough. That was a dream debate that I wanted. 4 hours long. It took me.
Wow.
But the IO preterists, they already had their signatures. With Dawn, I did my best to bring Max King to pin Dawn down to say, why did Max King become a universalist? The super chat question, that portion of the debate was phenomenal. I don't believe anybody, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, David Hester, Chris Day, Sam Frost, I don't believe they ever cornered Dawn the way that I did with Max King. I was bringing up irrevocable. Are you surpassing Max King? We want to know. Are you the more knowledgeable than him? I was asking him, what was his influence on your life? Do you disagree? Um, it was fun. That 4 hours was fun. It wasn't long enough. I brought up IO. I didn't feel like I was debating for myself. I felt like I was debating for other worldviews, other full preterists as well. And what can I say? That was fun. So I can't thank you enough because you definitely helped me make that dream come true. And I had no intentions. I had no intentions that it would ever go that far. That's what made it so phenomenal. So to me, I believe your best days are ahead of you, especially on your YouTube channel. And if there's anything I can do, to help you, to assist you, by all means, that I'm always in your corner. And what can I say? I have the utmost respect for you, for life. So thank you so very much, Brian. Please keep me posted on any ideas, and I will be there. If there's anything I could do, I would be there. So please, just keep me updated.
Okay, thanks, man. Will do.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Everyone in the comment section, I appreciate your attention. You know what? I'm going to post your YouTube channel in the description. So you
Okay,
guys, if you
thank
haven't subscribed to Brian's YouTube channel, it is the best YouTube channel on eschatology. I mean, there's just a variety of voices on there. And Brian's somebody who takes a journalistic approach. Last time I remember, and you know what? What can I say? He's a veteran in this theology business, as many of you guys already in the chat already know. So thank you so very much, Brian. Thank you so very much, everyone, for your attention. And I'm looking forward to what the future holds and more content from you, Brian. So thank you so very much.
Well, thank you, sir.
All righty. Well, take care. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.